In a move that has sent seismic shockwaves through global financial markets, Detroit assembly lines, and the corridors of power in Beijing, President Donald J. Trump today unleashed a blistering, no-holds-barred assault on the Chinese Communist Party, branding its electric vehicle strategy the greatest act of economic cheating and industrial sabotage the world has ever witnessed. Standing before a packed Rose Garden audience of auto workers, union leaders, and Republican lawmakers, Trump announced devastating new tariffs, including a crushing 125% duty on all Chinese-made electric vehicles and a 60% levy on Chinese lithium-ion batteries and critical components, effective May 1st, 2026. The goal, he declared, is nothing less than to rescue the American auto industry from Beijing's predatory subsidies and protect more than 1.7 million U.S. jobs that hang in the balance. As Chinese EV giant BYD stock plunged 28% in early trading and Tesla shares surged 9%, the world braced for what could become the most consequential trade confrontation since the 2018-2019 U.S.-China tariff battles, only this time centered on the future of transportation itself. Trump accuses Beijing of cheating in the electric vehicle industry. President Trump did not hold back in his condemnation of what he called Beijing's systematic, state-orchestrated theft of the 21st century. He accused the Chinese government of funneling more than $180 billion in direct and indirect subsidies to domestic EV manufacturers since 2015, creating an artificial cost advantage that no free market competitor could ever match. They build these cars with slave labor, stolen American technology, and mountains of taxpayer money from the Chinese people, then dump them on our shores at prices designed to bankrupt our factories and put our workers on the street, Trump thundered. He pointed to specific examples. BYD, which received land grants, zero-interest loans from state banks, and purchased subsidies equivalent to $8,000, $12,000 per vehicle, now controls nearly 35% of China's domestic EV market and has been aggressively expanding exports. NIO and Xpeng benefited from similar state support, allowing them to price vehicles 30 to 40% below comparable American or German models even after shipping costs. The president highlighted how China's Made in China 2025 industrial policy explicitly targeted electric vehicles as a strategic sector for global dominance. By 2025, China produced an estimated 9.2 million battery electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles, roughly 65% of global output, while the United States managed only 1.85 million, despite massive Inflation Reduction Act incentives. Trump argued that this dominance was not the result of superior innovation, but of unfair practices. Forced technology transfers from joint venture partners like General Motors and Volkswagen, widespread intellectual property theft documented in U.S. Trade Representative reports, and the construction of massive overcapacity. Chinese factories currently have the ability to build 15 million EVs annually, while domestic demand hovers around 7 million, creating a surplus that Beijing is desperate to export. This is not competition, Trump said. This is economic warfare. Industry analysts quickly validated parts of the president's critique. A 2025 report by the Rhodium Group estimated that Chinese EV subsidies and below-market financing totaled between $120 billion and $150 billion over the past decade, enabling firms to sell vehicles at a loss in foreign markets to gain share, a classic dumping strategy. U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai, who joined Trump at the podium, added that Chinese EV supply chains often rely on forced labor in Xinjiang for critical minerals and polysilicon, raising both ethical and national security concerns. Trump's rhetoric resonated with union leaders. United Auto Workers President Shawn Fain, who endorsed Trump in 2024 after years of Democratic alignment, called the tariffs a long overdue lifeline for the American middle class. Trump imposes heavy tariffs on China. The centerpiece of today's announcement was a sweeping tariff regime aimed squarely at neutralizing China's cost advantage. Effective May 1st, 2026, the United States will impose a 125% tariff on finished Chinese electric passenger vehicles and light trucks, a 60% tariff on Chinese lithium-ion battery cells, packs, and related components, a 35% tariff on electric motors, power electronics, and charging equipment originating from China. An additional 25% national security tariff on any Chinese-origin steel, aluminum, or rare earth materials used in U.S. EV production unless importers prove the materials were sourced outside China. These measures build on the Section 301 tariffs maintained and expanded from Trump's first term and Biden-era actions, but go significantly further. The White House estimates the new duties will raise the landed cost of a typical $28,000 Chinese EV to more than $63,000 once duties, shipping, and compliance costs are included, effectively pricing them out of the mainstream U.S. market. The stated objective is to protect and expand domestic production. Trump cited commitments from General Motors, Ford, Stellantis, Rivian, Lucid, and Tesla to add or maintain more than 280,000 U.S. assembly and battery plant jobs over the next 3 years if the tariffs remain in place. We are not going to let China turn Detroit into a ghost town the way they did with steel towns in the 1990s, Trump declared. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent projected that the tariffs could reduce the U.S. auto trade deficit with China by $45–55 billion annually within 2 years, while spurring $120 billion in new private sector investment in domestic battery gigafactories and semiconductor supply chains. Wall Street's initial reaction was mixed but largely positive for American automakers. Tesla stock jumped 9.4% in pre-market trading on expectations that higher Chinese import costs would boost demand for its Fremont and Austin-built vehicles. Shares of Rivian and Lucid each rose more than 12%. Chinese ADRs, by contrast, were hammered. BYD fell 28%, NIO dropped 19%, and XPeng declined 22%. The broader Shanghai Composite Index opened down 4.8%, its worst single-day drop since the 2023 banking crisis. Trump calls for strong action. Trump went beyond today's tariffs, issuing a clear warning and a menu of even tougher measures if Beijing fails to change course. He proposed legislation that would authorize the president to raise the EV tariff to 200% if China increases subsidies or retaliates against U.S. agricultural or aircraft exports. He also called for a Buy American, Build American executive order requiring all federal, state, and municipal fleets to purchase only vehicles assembled in the United States or allied nations with at least 75% North American content. In addition, Trump urged Congress to make permanent the 10% advanced manufacturing tax credit for U.S. battery and EV plants, and to double funding for the Department of Energy's loan programs supporting domestic critical mineral processing. We tried talking. We tried modest tariffs. China just kept cheating, Trump said. Now we are done playing games. Either they stop the subsidies, stop the dumping, and stop the theft, or we will make it impossible for them to sell a single car in the greatest market on earth. The president also floated the idea of secondary tariffs on any third country automaker that sources more than 40% of its battery content from China, a move clearly aimed at pressuring European and Asian manufacturers to diversify supply chains away from Beijing. Beijing accused of unfair competition. Trump's charges against Beijing were not limited to subsidies. He and senior administration officials detailed a multi-layered strategy of unfair competition that includes massive state-directed lending at negative real interest rates through policy banks such as the China Development Bank, local government champion policies that provide free land, expedited permitting, and guaranteed government procurement for favored EV makers, alleged cyber-enabled intellectual property theft targeting U.S. battery chemistry, autonomous driving software, and thermal management systems, cases the FBI and CISA have linked to Chinese state actors, environmental cost externalization. Chinese coal-fired power plants and lax pollution controls allow battery and vehicle factories to operate at far lower costs than U.S. or European facilities, subject to strict EPA and EU emissions rules. Export financing through the Export-Import Bank of China that undercuts commercial lenders, enabling Chinese firms to offer 0% financing to foreign buyers. A 2025 European Commission investigation, which the White House referenced, concluded that Chinese EV makers benefited from massive and non-market subsidies amounting to 17 to 38% of vehicle value, justifying the EU's own 45% provisional tariffs imposed in late 2025. Trump argued that the United States should have acted even earlier and more aggressively. Europe finally woke up, he said. America is now leading the charge. Trump's tariffs protect the U.S. economy. President Trump framed the new tariffs not as a blunt instrument, but as a precision scalpel aimed at restoring balance to an industry that has been systematically hollowed out. According to a White House Council of Economic Advisors briefing released simultaneously with the announcement, the measures are projected to save or create 248,000 direct and indirect American jobs by the end of 2028. These include 87,000 assembly line positions at plants in Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, and South Carolina, 62,000 battery and component manufacturing roles, and tens of thousands more in logistics, engineering, and supplier networks. The economic logic is straightforward yet powerful. A typical $29,999 Chinese EV currently undercuts comparable U.S.-built models by $8,000 to $11,000 even after ocean freight. With the new 125% tariff, that same vehicle's effective price jumps to approximately $67,500 before dealer margins and transportation. This places it well above the average transaction price of American-made alternatives. The result is an immediate redirection of demand toward domestic and allied production. Tesla has already announced it will accelerate the ramp-up of its Austin Gigafactory and add a third shift at Fremont. General Motors confirmed a $4.2 billion expansion of its Ultium battery plants in Ohio and Michigan that had been on hold pending policy clarity. Critically, the tariffs also address the national security dimension of supply chain dependence. China currently processes more than 85% of the world's lithium, 70% of cobalt, and 95% of graphite used in EV batteries. A sudden cutoff would severely disrupt America's electric transition. By making Chinese content prohibitively expensive, the tariffs create strong incentives for domestic mining and processing. The Department of Energy's loan portfolio for critical mineral projects has already seen a 40% increase in applications. Consumer impact is acknowledged but downplayed by administration officials. Average new EV transaction prices are expected to rise 7 to 9% in 2026 before stabilizing. The existing $7,500 federal tax credit remains intact and applies to more qualifying vehicles. Officials argue the trade-off supports long-term national interests. Wall Street reaction has been largely positive for U.S. automakers. Analysts raised price targets for major EV companies, citing stronger competitive positioning. Meanwhile, Chinese EV makers face significant financial pressure, impact of tariffs on both economies. The tariffs will not be painless for either side, but the effects are uneven. United States, short-term economic impact is moderate. Federal Reserve projections suggest a slight reduction in GDP growth and a temporary increase in inflation. Auto loan stress may rise slightly, but the labor market remains stable. The broader trend points toward industrial growth. Foreign investment in U.S. auto and battery sectors has surged, exceeding $38 billion since early 2025. States are competing for new manufacturing projects. China. The economic impact is more severe. The U.S. accounted for a significant share of China's EV exports. Losing access to this market could idle hundreds of thousands of workers across key industrial provinces. Major Chinese EV companies have already seen sharp declines in market value. Some firms are seeking government support. China's options for retaliation are limited and potentially self-damaging. Currency adjustments remain possible but carry financial risks. Global ripple effects. International automakers are reassessing supply chains. Many are shifting battery sourcing away from China. Countries like Mexico and Vietnam may benefit as alternative production hubs. Global institutions warn of supply chain fragmentation, though some analysts see it as necessary restructuring. Historical precedent suggests disruptions may be temporary. Past trade restrictions eventually led to increased domestic investment and job creation. Global EV competition intensifies. Trump urges cooperation to counter China. In his closing remarks, President Trump called on allied nations to coordinate their response. He emphasized the need for unified action against China's industrial strategy. Plans were announced for a high-level international summit. The proposed coalition would align trade policies and supply chain strategies. Key measures include coordinated tariffs, shared resource procurement, and joint technology development. Early responses from allies have been positive. Several major economies are considering deeper cooperation. Emerging markets see opportunities to expand their roles in global supply chains. Competition is increasing across multiple dimensions. The United States maintains strengths in software, autonomous driving, and advanced technology. These advantages are expected to grow under protective trade policies. Environmental considerations remain complex. Differences in energy sources and production standards influence the overall impact of EV expansion. The policy shift may slow short-term growth, but improve long-term sustainability and quality. Conclusion. April 24th, 2026 marks a pivotal moment in global industrial competition. The new tariffs represent a major shift in U.S. trade and economic policy. They aim to strengthen domestic industry, protect jobs, and secure technological leadership. Global markets and supply chains will continue to adjust. The long-term outlook suggests a more balanced and resilient system. The future of electric vehicles will still advance, but with greater emphasis on domestic production and fair competition.